Welcome to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. This lecture is intended for students enrolled in the Academy's Classical Reasoning 1 course. If you're not enrolled and would like to join us for self-paced studies, please visit classicalliberalarts.com. My name is William Michael. I'm the Academy Headmaster, and I'll be leading this study of the second part of Chapter 2 of Porphyry's Introduction. I mentioned in the previous lecture that Chapter 2 of Porphyry's Introduction is a very important chapter, very important text in the study of philosophy, introduces two of the most important concepts, a philosophical understanding of genus and species. For whatever reason, all of this content was crammed into Chapter 2. So I'm going to break up the chapter into two parts. We already finished the first part where we focused on the definition of genus. And in the second part, we're going to move on to the second predicable, which is species. And we're going to discuss a couple other subjects that relate to genus and species, which are all contained in Chapter 2. As a reminder, Porphyry was a Platonic philosopher. He was not an Aristotelian. He was a Platonic philosopher. He was not a Christian, by the way. He was a Platonic philosopher. He lived between 234 and 305 AD. And being a good teacher, he wanted to help his students succeed in their study of Aristotle's categories. And so he wrote this introduction, and we're now in the second chapter of this introduction. In this introduction, he has a very clear goal. He identifies as an experienced student of philosophy and teacher 5 concepts named the 5 predicables, or different things that can be predicated of subjects. He says these 5 predicables, these 5 concepts, are commonly misunderstood, and they become a source of trouble for any students who are reading the philosophical works, especially the logical works of Aristotle. So he sets out in this introduction to explain and clarify what's meant by these 5 predicables: genus, species, difference, peculiarity, and accident, when we read the writings of Aristotle. So that's the goal of the introduction of Porphyry, and again, we're in Chapter 2, focusing on the first 2 predicables, genus and species. For Catholic students, these lessons are very important in the history of philosophy. In medieval history, Catholic philosophers studied the writings of Porphyry to help them do exactly what Porphyry intends to do, to help them understand Aristotle's philosophy and interpret it correctly. We find the writings of Porphyry, his introduction, attached to the logical works of Aristotle in medieval texts. And so we can see that among our forebears, philosophically and spiritually, this study was very important. And it's a central part of our classical Catholic education. So we're going to get into this second part of Chapter 2, but before we do that, let's take a moment, ask the Lord to bless and direct our study and lead us to success. Let us pray. Lord our God, in your wisdom and love you surround us with the mysteries of the universe. Send your Spirit upon us and fill us with your wisdom and blessings. Grant that we may devote ourselves to our studies and draw ever closer to you, the source of all knowledge. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. You should have already read the content of Chapter 2. If you haven't, you should hit pause and go and do that. If you've already read the content, we can continue, and we're going to divide the text as we always do. This lesson will be a little different because we're continuing the previous lecture, so we're going to pick up where we left off, but we'll divide the content so we can see what Porphyry is doing in this text, and then we'll go through it line by line and make sure that all of the vocabulary, all of the ideas that are shared by Porphyry are clear, so that students with a reasonable amount of work can understand this teaching and move on, more importantly, to the study of Aristotle. So let's begin by dividing the text. Again, we've already divided chapter 2 into two parts. The first part we dealt with in the previous lecture, and now we're finishing the second half of chapter 2. We're going to divide this second half into 3 parts. So that will make a total of 5 parts for chapter 2. So we're going to begin with part 3 and add part 4 and 5 here in this second lecture. So part 3 begins where Porphyry begins teaching about species. He says, species, however, is predicated. Species, however, is predicated. That's the beginning of part 3 and of this second part of our study of chapter 2. He goes through the definition of species, just as we did with genus in the first part of this lesson. Part 4 begins where we read, but the most special species. But the most special species. This is section 33 in the text. I believe I've numbered the sections through 40 in chapter 2. This is sections 33 through 37. In this fourth part, we're going to study the relationship between genus, species, individuals, and so on, and learn about the principles of division and collection. So an important new philosophical concept. Remember in the opening chapter, Porphyry, when he was listing the reasons why this study is important, he said, not only does it prepare us for the study of Aristotle's categories, but it also helps us to understand how to make true definitions, how to manage logical division, which we're going to learn about in this chapter, and so on. So we're going to get into some of that here in part 4. And then lastly, part 5 begins with section 37, where we read, with respect to genus and species, therefore. With respect to genus and species, therefore. And there we're going to learn the rules of predication, a pretty important topic, obviously. The rules of predication, the rules of saying things about subjects, understanding how true predication is done, which is going to be very important when we get to the study of reasoning, because we're going to be able to see whether predicates or statements about subjects do in fact follow this rule and are therefore true. So we're going to get into that at the end of chapter 2. So let's go ahead and get started with the third part of this 2-lecture look at chapter 2. The third part, will give it the name, the definition of species and the logical hierarchy. The definition of species and the logical hierarchy. We read in Porphyry, quote, species, however, is predicated indeed of every form, according to which signification it is said, form is first worthy of imperial sway. That second sentence there, form is first worthy of imperial sway, that's a quote from a poet, so it may seem a little strange to run into that, but Porphyry is quoting a poet there, which is why we find some unusual language. Species is predicated of every form, according to which signification it is said, form is first worthy of imperial sway. Remember, Porphyry explained in the beginning of chapter 2 that one of the reasons why students have trouble with Aristotle's categories is that these terms, genus and species, are confusing. And they're confusing because these terms are used in a number of different ways, and we've got to make sure that we understand what Aristotle means when he uses these terms. So here he gives us a first use of this term species. One way that species was used in the ancient world is that species is predicated of every form. Species is predicated of every form. And he quotes this line of poetry because species is referring to this concept. Form is first worthy of imperial sway. He begins by noting for us that species can simply mean form. Species can simply mean form. The quoted line there is from a poet showing that species or form can refer to beauty or appearance. This shows us that, like genus, the word species has a number of different meanings, and we're going to have to sort through them and make sure we understand the philosophical meaning of species. That example there, that first use, is not the way that Aristotle uses the word species. He does not use it as a synonym for form. Porphyry goes on to say, quote, that also is called species. Here's a second use. That also is called species, which is placed under the genus already explained, according to which signification we are accustomed to say that man is a species of animal, animal being a genus. We also say that the white is a species of color, and that triangle is a species of figure. In philosophy, therefore, species has a technical meaning. It refers to what is placed under a genus in the logical hierarchy. What is placed under a genus in the logical hierarchy. We're going to study this in detail in this lesson as we go through the rest of chapter 2. Remember, we talked about the logical hierarchy, the tree of Porphyry, in the previous lecture. We said that this is a very simple concept, but we have to remember that this is not a biology class. We're not talking about classes of animals. We're not talking about, even though we're talking about animal and the species of animal, we're talking about ideas and words, ideas and spoken things. This is not a natural science class. So make sure you keep that separate. When we talk about a class of things, these classes may or may not be divisible into smaller classes. And the example that we keep running into in Porphyry is animal is a name for anything that lives and moves and has sensation and so on. So it refers to a class. It's a common name of many different things. So that idea of genus is a large class of things. And a genus not only contains many different things, but it contains classes of things under it. Species is a class of things contained in a genus or set under a genus if we're diagramming the logical hierarchy. So a species is a class within a genus. A species is a class within a genus. It is placed under a genus in the logical hierarchy. So man, which is a common name that can be predicated of any individual man, man is a class of things, but it's a class of things contained in the genus of animal. Man is a species under the genus animal. White, the color white, is a species under the genus of color. Triangle is a species. There are different kinds of triangles, by the way, different sizes, different shapes, and so on, but all triangles. Triangle is a species under the genus figure or shape. So this shows how species always exists in relation to some genus above it. A genus divides into different species or subclasses. Porphyry continues and says, if, however, in explaining genus we make mention of species, and say that genus is that which is predicated of many things differing in species, in answer to the question what a thing is, which we learned in the previous lecture, by the way, and if we say that species is that which is under the aforesaid genus, it is requisite to know that since genus is the genus of some things, and species is the species of something, each of each, it is necessary to use both the definitions of both. So Porphyry points out what appears to be a logical problem. If we define genus by referring to species, and then turn around and define species by referring to genus, we have a circular definition that really makes no sense. It doesn't answer the question. It would assume that we already know what genus and species are to define genus and species. That makes no sense. So we're going to need to define both terms, genus and species, in a proper way without depending on each other. And again, we see here the care that Porphyry gives as a teacher to recognize that it's not good enough to just give an answer. If someone says, what is genus? To say, a genus is that which can be spoken of many things differing in species and so on. You're assuming part of the answer, which the student is not going to know. So we see that Porphyry is sensitive, and this is an important characteristic of good teachers, because they're good students first. They know when an answer is a good answer and a helpful answer, and they also know when an answer stinks and doesn't really provide a student with the help he needs. So Porphyry says these definitions might seem good, but they're really not good enough. We need to do better. So he shows himself as a careful student. He shows himself as a careful and responsible teacher. And he shows how carefully and precisely he thinks with respect to the topic of rational philosophy or logic. He goes on to write, they, and remember when he refers to they, he said in the opening chapter that he was going to be referring to the writings of ancient philosophers who were followers of Aristotle, the peripatetics. So when he refers to these philosophers and simply uses the pronoun they, he already told us who he's going to be referring to in the opening chapter. He says, they unfold the meaning of species as follows. So knowing that problem of using the terms genus and species in the definition of each, the ancient philosophers, the peripatetics, give the meaning of species as follows. Species is that which is arranged under genus, and of which genus is predicated in answer to the question, what a thing is. They unfold, therefore, the meaning of species as follows. To repeat this, species is that which is arranged under genus, and species is that of which genus is predicated in answer to the question what a thing is. Notice, very importantly, we're going to learn more about this later in this lesson. Notice, genus is predicated of species. That's a very important lesson that he just provided. Genus is predicated of species. In answer to the question, what is this? This is one definition of species. Species is what falls under a genus, and the genus can be predicated or said about species when we ask what it is. So if we refer to the species of man, again, man is a species, and we ask, what is man? What is man? Our answer is going to begin with the genus. Genus is predicated of species. We'll answer, man is an animal. We'll identify man's genus, showing that man is a species under animal. Porphyry continues, quote, they also explain it thus. Species is that which is predicated of many things, differing in number, in answer to the question, what is this? Species is predicated of many things, so in that way it's like genus. But genus is predicated of many things differing in species. Species is predicated of many things differing in number. And it answers the question, what is this? Which again is the same question that genus answers. So this definition both compares and contrasts species to genus. Species is that which is predicated of many things, differing in number, in answer to the question, what is this? This is another definition. Species is what we predicate of many individuals. Species is what we predicate of individuals when we ask the question, what is this, or what are they? If we look at Socrates and we ask, what is Socrates? Socrates is an individual. So when we predicate about Socrates, when we answer the question, what is Socrates? The answer is going to be a species. Socrates is man. We identify the species of an individual when asked the question, what is this? If someone asks, what is Plato? Again, we'll answer with the species. Plato, being an individual, is a man. The species man is predicated of many individuals who differ in number. That is, they're simply different individuals. They're different persons. That's what it means to differ in number, but not in species. So they're all of the same kind. They're just different individuals. So that's what it means when we see species is that which is predicated of many things differing in number, in answer to the question, what is this? Porphyry continues, quote, this explanation pertains to the most special species. And I just want to make it clear what the use of this term special means, because it's a very common word in English. We talk about things being special. This is a special day in the church calendar. It's special. And that use of the term special usually means like it's important or it's valuable. It's special. But notice that the word special comes from the word species. So most special species means a species which is most species. So we're going to see that there are different kinds of species. There are most special species, and then there are common or more general species, which is confusing when we consider that general refers to genus. So again, two different kinds of species. Species proper, we could say, and most special species. So the definition that we were just given, that species is that which is predicated of many things differing in number. In answer to the question, what is this? That's the definition of species when we're referring to most special species. Most special species contains only individuals. Most special species contains only individuals. A good example of most special species would be man. Man doesn't divide into different species. When we come down through the logical hierarchy, we come to animal, and then we divide animal into man and beasts. Man doesn't divide into another level of species, but it comes to an end. And the only thing contained within the species man are individual men, individuals. So man is a most special species. It contains only individuals. And we'll learn more about this in a little bit. Again, Porphyry was writing, this explanation pertains to most special species, which is species only, but no longer genus also. The other explanations of species, which we mentioned above, will pertain to species which are not most special. Now, at this point, there's really no way to understand what he's talking about until we understand this idea of the logical hierarchy. And it's really very simple. I don't find this a difficult thing to understand. I think that many people try to teach it and explain it when they really don't know what they're talking about. And the reason why they get all confused is because they compare this logical hierarchy to the system of nomenclature or taxonomy that we're familiar with in biology. Carolus Linnaeus invented a whole system for the classification of animals. And many people, when they read chapter 2 and read about the logical hierarchy, they've already been exposed to this idea of the classification in animals, which came 1,200 years, 1,300 years, maybe even more, after Porphyry. I think Carolus Linnaeus wrote in the 1700s. But they learn about this classification system, and then they come to Aristotle and they read that into it, and that causes confusion. This is not talking about classification of physical things. Remember, we're talking about ideas and words. This is the study of logic. This is rational philosophy. So I think that's the cause of confusion. And when we are aware of that and are careful to not let that modern teaching come into our ancient study, we can spare ourselves that confusion. So let's just take a few minutes to understand this logical hierarchy more clearly. I've mentioned it before in the first lecture in chapter 2, but it's time here in this second part of chapter 2 to really make it clear, because we now have this idea of most special species. So we've got a couple different things, and let's just clarify this. We've got genus, which is a large class that contains species. Genus, a large class that contains species. Remember, that's not the official definition we've learned in this chapter, but just for the sake of understanding, let's keep it simple. A genus is a large class of ideas, of things, that contains smaller classes or smaller groups, namely species. As we continue down the hierarchy, we find that some genera, some genuses, I don't want to use the wrong form of the plural is genera. Some genera divide into species that can continue dividing. when we have a species that divides into smaller classes or species, we now have a species that divides into species, and that's confusing. When we talk about genus and species, if a class contains species, it's referred to as a genus with respect to those species. So a class can be both a species of a higher genus and a genus to lower species. So some classes can be both genus and species. That's sort of a mind-boggling idea to think about. And once you grasp this concept, it's a very simple concept, but unfamiliar. Once you grasp this concept, you'll understand this whole logical hierarchy. It's really very simple. A genus is a class that contains species. Some species contain species, and therefore they are both species and genus. Species with respect to the larger genus they belong to, and genus with respect to the smaller species that they contain. So we've got a genus which contains species, some species which are also genus to smaller species, and then we've got species which do not contain smaller species but only contain individuals. At the very top of this hierarchy, we have a genus which is not a species of any larger genus. We have the first genus, as it were. And Aristotle gives this the name most general genus, and we'll learn about this in just a minute. So the genus at the top of the hierarchy, which is not a species of a higher genus, but is only genus, that is the most general genus. And remember, the word general comes from genus. So it's the most genus. It's the totally genus or only genus. It's not a species of some higher genus. So that's the most general genus. Under the most general genus are species. But those species also contain species, so they are both species and genus. And that continues to the next level down, where we find species of a genus, which are a genus of smaller species, and that continues all the way down to the last species, to the final species, to the most special species, which contains no more species, which is not a genus to any smaller classes, but which only contains individuals. And that's the entire logical hierarchy. Most general genus at the top, individuals all the way at the bottom. In between the most general genus and the individual, we have species. Some of these species are both species and genus. Some of these species are only species and never genus. And that's the logical hierarchy. I mentioned in the previous lecture that one thing you can do, if you'd like to learn more about this, just quickly, for the sake of reference and understanding, is Google. Go online and search for Tree of Porphyry. Tree, T-R-E-E, of Porphyry. You'll find an article by me, and it will have an illustration of this logical hierarchy where we follow one column, as it were, or one tree, moving through the different most general genus, genus and species, and then most special species, and then individuals. You can see how it actually works, and I explain the illustration in that article. I recommend you find and give that a read if you'd really like to understand this. All right, so getting back to Porphyry here. He says, let's see, the explanation that we were given that species is that which is predicated of many things differing in number, in answer to the question, what is this? That really refers to the most special species, which is species only, but no longer genus. The other explanations will pertain to species which are not most special. That should make sense now. So Porphyry introduces an important distinction. Some species are also genera, while others are only species, like man, which is not a genus of anything else. The second definition applies only to the lowest or most special species. The other definition, the previous definition, applies to all species. He goes on and says, quote, "What we have said, however, will be evident after this manner." So he's going to explain this more fully. In each category, and again, we haven't talked about what the categories are, there are different kinds of predicates. Not to be confused with the predicables, the 5 predicables, but the categories are different kinds of predicates. The word kategoria in Greek is just the Greek word for predicate. So when we talk about categories, don't just think of different classes of things. It's more specific than that. We're talking about classes of predicates. Remember, this is logic. We're talking about ideas and spoken things. Classes of predicates. Porphyry says, in each category, there are certain things which are most general, and again, others which are most special. And between these, between the most general and the most special, are others which are both genera and species. So Porphyry explains that there is a hierarchy from the most general at the top, as I mentioned before, down to the most specific. And there are intermediate levels of this hierarchy that function as both genus and species, depending on what we're comparing them to. And understanding these different levels is crucial for understanding how logical classification, again, logical classification, not biological classification, but logical classification works. Porphyry continues, the genus which is most general at the top of the hierarchy, the genus which is most general is that above which there will no longer be another superior genus. And the most special species at the bottom of the hierarchy is that after which there will not be another inferior or lower species. The most general genus has nothing above it in its category. The most special species has nothing below it in a category except individuals. These are the two extremes of the logical hierarchy. They're called the extremes because they're on the ends. Most general genus and most special species. The two extremes. Porphyry then continues and says, quote, between the most general genus and the most special species there are other things which are both genera and species when referred to different things. These intermediate terms have a double nature. They're species when compared to what's above them, and genera when compared to what's below them. Porphyry continues, quote, but what has been said will become evident in one category. So if we study one category, we'll understand how this whole logical hierarchy works and realize that Porphyry is suggesting that we just focus on one category. If we learn how one category breaks down into its hierarchy, we'll be able to see how the other categories work. And this work that he does here, looking at one category from top to bottom, this is what's referred to as the tree of Porphyry. This is what you'll see in that illustration of the tree of Porphyry. So starting at the top, he says, essence is itself a genus, essence. And just so you know, the word essence here in Thomas Taylor's translation can also be translated substance. So if you look at a different translation of Porphyry's Introduction, you might see the word substance instead of essence. They're used, I wouldn't say they mean exactly the same thing, but they're often used interchangeably in different translations. Thomas Taylor, being a little more careful as a philosopher, chooses the word essence, which is actually better. He says essence is a genus. It is the most general genus. Under this is body. So body is a species of essence. Under body is animated body. Animated body is a species of body. Under animated body is animal. Under animal is the species rational animal, under which is man. And under man are Socrates and Plato, the individuals of the human species. So this is Porphyry's famous example of the logical hierarchy for one category, the category of essence or substance. And it's known as the tree of Porphyry. We see essence, then body under it, then animated body, then animal, then rational animal, then man, then individual men. This shows us how each level contains the levels below it, starting with most general genus, moving then through the intermediate classes, which are both genus and species, down to most special species, man, and then finally the individuals. So here we have an example that illustrates for us the logical hierarchy, the tree of Porphyry. Porphyry goes on and says, quote, of these, essence is the most general, and that which is alone genus. Man is the most special, and that which is alone species. At the top, essence is only a genus because there's nothing above it. And at the bottom, man is only a species because it's not a genus of anything else. That is, any other species, just individuals. But body is a species of essence, and body is the genus of animated body. Let me word that a little better than Porphyry did here. He says, body is one of the species contained in essence. So body is a species of essence. However, body is also a genus containing species under it. Body is the genus of animated body. So body is both a species with respect to essence and a genus with respect to animated body. Then we look at animated body and we realize that animated body also contains species. Animated body is a species of body above it, but is the genus of the species animal. So animated body contains a number of different species. So it's both genus and species. Species with respect to body, and genus with respect to animal and other kinds of bodies. And then if we look at animal, we see that the same thing is true. Animal is a species of animated body, but it's the genus of species under it. It's the genus of, for example, rational animal. Then if we look at rational animal, we see that rational animal is one of the species of animal, but it also contains a number of different classes. Rational animal contains a number of different classes or species, one of which is man. So man is a species with respect to rational animal. So each of these, body, animated body, animal, and rational animal, they're all intermediate terms in the logical hierarchy. They are both species with respect to the genus above them and genus with respect to the species beneath them. And this shows that the same term can have different functions depending on its relationships with other ideas. Porphyry goes on and says, man is a species of rational animal, but man is not the genus of anything beneath it. The species man contains nothing but individual men. Man cannot be divided into further species, only into individuals, and this is why man is an example of most special species. And remember, there will be other most special species contained under the category essence. We just follow one branch, as it were, or one line through the logical hierarchy from essence all the way down to the individual man. Man is a species of rational animal, but is no longer genus of particular men, but is species alone. Men cannot be divided into further species, but only into individuals. And that's why man is called the most special species. And remember, there are other most special species under this category of essence. Man is one of the most special species. And this is because this is as specific as we can get. And remember, the word specific comes from species. It's as specific as we can get while still remaining universal. That is, we're still speaking of classes rather than individuals. So the most special species is the most specific we can get while still speaking about classes or universals. Porphyry continues, quote, everything prior to individuals, which is proximately predicated of them, will be species only, and no longer genus also. Everything prior to individuals, which is proximately predicated of them, a little difficult language here, will be species only, and no longer genus also. So whatever is directly above individuals, the last of all of the different classes that can be named, whatever is directly above or before individuals in the hierarchy is species only and not genus. That's because individuals don't form species. They're the ultimate particulars. They're individuals, not classes. Quote, hence, as essence, which is in the highest place, most general, because there is no genus prior to it or above it, thus also man being a species after which there is no other species, nor anything which is capable of being divided into species but individuals, will be species alone, and the last species, and as we have said, the most special species. This explains why man is labeled the most special species. It can't be divided into further species, only into individuals like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and so on. Porphyry continues, quote, but the media will be the species of things prior to them and the genera of things posterior to them. We mentioned intermediate terms before. The universal terms or the names for classes of things which can be both species and genera. Here, Porphyry introduces another name. Instead of intermediate terms, he refers to them as media. So media is the same thing as intermediate terms. So we have the extremes, most general genus and most special species, and then everything in between them. All of the classes which name both species and genus, they're called intermediate terms or media. The intermediate terms have a double relationship. They're species relative to what's above them, and their genera relative to what's below them in the logical hierarchy. Hence, these have two habitudes. We saw this word in the previous lecture. Two habitudes, one to things prior to them, according to which they are said to be the species of them, but the other to things posterior to them, according to which they are said to be the genera of them. So these intermediate terms or media have two habitudes. And we said in the last lecture that habitudes means relationships. So the most general genus at the top of the hierarchy has only one habitude. It has only one relation to other things. It is genus. It is genus to other things. That's the only relationship it has, one habitude. But the intermediate terms, or the media, have two relationships. They are species with reference to the genus above them, and they are genus with reference to the species below them. So they have two habitudes, or two relations to different classes. Again, habitudes means relationships. It's a word you'll see in the translation of Taylor because, like I said, Taylor is a great philosopher, and when he translates from the Greek into English, he chooses words carefully so that philosophically minded people can see the words he uses and understand what's being referred to in the original text. So he uses this word habitudes instead of the common word relationships. Each intermediate term, he says, has two relationships, one upwards as species and one downwards as genus. I think that's easy to understand once you get past the language barrier. The extremes, most general genus and most special species, have only one habitude. The top and the bottom of the hierarchy each have only one relationship because they're at the limits. They're the extremes. Porphyry writes, quote, "For that which is most general has indeed a habitude as to the things which are under it, since it is the highest genus of all things, but has no longer a habitude as to things prior to it, being supreme and the first principle. And as we have said, that above which there will not be any superior genus. The most general genus relates only to what's below it, since there's nothing above it. It serves as the first principle of the category. The most general genus is the first principle of the category." Porphyry writes, quote, "The most special species also has one habitude as towards things prior to it, of which it is the species. Yet it has not a different habitude as towards things posterior to it, but it is said to be the species of individuals, as comprehending them, and again the species of things prior to it, as being comprehended by them." Now, this can get a little confusing because when we talk about the most special species, when we talk about it and its relationship to the individuals under it, it's seen as a larger class which contains things. We don't call it a genus. We never call it a genus. We always call it a species. The most special species is always called species, even though it does have these two different relationships. It has a relationship to the genus above it and to the individuals within it. But it doesn't have a relationship to any species below it, and therefore it's never referred to as a genus, only as a species in both of its different relations, both to classes above and to individuals below. To comprehend means to contain. Don't get confused by that word comprehended. You might think, oh, well, doesn't comprehension mean to understand things? Well, it's just a figure of speech. To comprehend means to contain or take hold of something. Think of the phrase we use when we say, wrap your brain around this, or you say, I just can't get my mind around this idea. That's the idea of comprehending. It really means containing, and it's just used as a figure of speech for understanding. The real meaning of the term comprehending is containing. So a most special species is contained by the genus above it, and it contains the individuals below it. Porphyry writes, quote, the most general genus, therefore, is defined to be that which, being genus, is not species. And again, it is that above which there will not be another superior genus. So the formal definition here of most general genus, it's genus only, not species. It has nothing above it. Quote, the most special species is defined to be that which, being species, is not genus, and that which, being species, cannot divide into species. Farther still, it is that also which is predicated of many things differing in number, in answer to the question, what is this? We saw that formal definition before. It's repeated here. The definition of most special species. It's species only, not genus, cannot be divided into species, and is predicated only of individuals. Porphyry goes on. Quote, but the media of the extremes, the intermediate terms, and he introduces another important word here. He says, the media of the extremes are called subaltern species and genera. Subaltern species and genera. And each of them is admitted to be genus and species, with reference, however, to different things. So he calls intermediate terms subaltern. They are subordinate genera and species that function as both, depending on their relationships, subaltern. He goes on, quote, for the things prior to the most special species in an ascent, as far as to the most general genus, are called subaltern genera and species. All the intermediate levels, all the media between the extremes are subaltern. They are both genera and species relative to different things. Thus, he gives some examples here. Thus, Agamemnon is Atrides, Pelopides, Tantalides, and in the last place of Jupiter. Now, this can be a little confusing because in the previous lesson we talked about the different uses of the terms genus, and here he gives us an illustration that kind of makes a mess of that. He's talking about Agamemnon, and he says Agamemnon is Atrides. That means Agamemnon is a son of Atreus. He is also Pelopides, which means a son of Pelops. and Tantalides, which is a son of Tantalides, moving up from the lowest to the highest, and in the last place, he is a son of Jupiter. So the tree, or the hierarchy, would start with Jupiter, which contains Tantalides, which contains Pelopides, the sons of Pelops, which contains Atrides, the sons of Atreus, and which contains the individual Agamemnon. So he gives this example from Greek mythology and shows how genealogical relationships are similar. They mirror logical relationships. Agamemnon belongs to an increasingly broader set of family groups, just as species belong to increasingly broader genera in the logical hierarchy. He says, quote, "In genealogies, however, they refer for the most part to one principle, for instance, to Jupiter. But in genera and species, this is not the case, for being is not the common genus of all things. Nor, as Aristotle says, are all things homogeneous, according to one supreme genus." So when Aristotle identifies the 10 different categories, he doesn't recognize anything above them. There's no one super category above all categories. There are 10 categories in Aristotelian philosophy, 10 different most general genera in Aristotelian rational philosophy. Unlike, as I said, unlike family trees, which we can see how they go back to one ancestor, logical categories don't go back to one supreme genus. Porphyry writes, quote, "But the first 10 genera are arranged, as in the categories, as the first 10 principles." And notice what we've done here. We've talked about the meaning of genus and species. We've talked about this logical hierarchy of things and how it works. We've looked at one example with the category of essence. And Porphyry has led us masterfully as a teacher to now understand what Aristotle's categories are. Aristotle identifies 10 categories, or 10 different kinds of predicates, in the first book of his works on the art of logic. Porphyry writes here, the first 10 genera, because there's not one super genus that unites all things. The first 10 genera are arranged, as in the categories of Aristotle, as the 10 first principles. So Aristotle identified 10 highest categories or genera. And again, we're going to learn these when we study Aristotle's categories, but just for the sake of becoming familiar with Aristotle's 10 categories, they were substance or essence, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, and passion. So what Aristotle was saying is, if you want to say something about a subject, there are only 10 different kinds of things that can be said. You can identify, or you can predicate a substance of a subject. You can predicate the quantity, the quality, a relation, a place, a time, a position, a state, an action, or a passion. These are the ultimate genera that cannot be reduced to anything higher. There's nothing above them. There are 10 most general genera. He goes on and says, quote, "Though someone should call these things beings, as if they belonged to some higher class, yet, says he will call them so homonymously and not synonymously." Now, you're not familiar with these terms, obviously. These terms are explained, homonymous and synonymous, they're explained in the first chapter of Aristotle's Categories. One of the problems when we read these words is that English students who have learned about homonyms and synonyms in elementary school actually learn definitions that are not true in logic. So if we think of a homonym in an English grammar class, we'll talk about things that sound the same, but have different meanings, like a duck being an animal and duck as in lower your head. There are two words that signify different ideas, but they have the same sound. That is what is called a homonym in English. And a synonym are two words that have the same meaning, like happy and joyful. We can say they're synonyms, but that's not what these words mean in Aristotle's philosophy and in Taylor's translation. So again, we've got to be very careful. Homonymous means that the same name is given to two things, but they're different. Homonymous means the name is the same, but the meaning is different. Not that they sound the same, but the name is actually the same. The name is the same, but the meanings of the two words or the two uses are different. Synonymous means that two things have the same name, and it has the same meaning for both of them. It has the same meaning for both of them. So homonymously means the same name but different meanings. Synonymously means the same name and same meaning. I'll give you an example. If I were to say that Socrates and Plato are men, Socrates and Plato are men, we would understand what I mean by the word men. But I could also say that Socrates and Terentia, a female, are men. I could say Socrates and Terentia are men. And when I use the word men in the second situation, I'm referring to humans. I'm using the term man to refer to humans. So you can have a male and a female and call them both man. And I can have two men and call them both men. But you can see that the word man can mean different things. They both have the same name. They're both called man. For Socrates and Plato, it has exactly the same meaning. For Socrates and Terentia, it has different meanings. That's a homonymous use of a term. So to understand what Porphyry wrote here, though someone should call all things beings, he will call them so homonymously. He'll use the same name for both of them, but it will have different meanings. He will not use the name synonymously. If we call everything being, if we say everything belongs to the superclass being, and we really examine that, we'll find that the word being is used in different senses. It's used homonymously, not in the same sense in every case or synonymously. Being is not a genuine genus. It's not a true genus because it doesn't have a single unified meaning across all categories. So philosophers before Aristotle proposed the idea that all categories were contained within being, but Aristotle rejected that, and that turned out to be true philosophy. Porphyry continues, quote, "For if being were the common genus of all things would be synonymously denominated beings. But the first principles being 10, the communion is in name only, and not also in the definition pertaining to the name or the meaning. If being were a true genus, everything that was contained in that genus would be called being in exactly the same way, have the same meaning. But since there are 10 different categories, things are called beings in 10 different ways. The word being is the same for all of them, but the meaning differs from one category to another." This is Porphyry's point here, clarifying Aristotle's rejection of the use of being as the ultimate genus of all things. Porphyry writes, the most general genera, therefore, are 10. There are 10 highest genera corresponding to Aristotle's 10 categories. And this establishes the ultimate structure of reality with respect to ideas and spoken things. This is extremely important. This, again, establishes the system or the logical hierarchy, the whole system, which should order our thoughts. The system of Aristotle's 10 categories should be the system that we use to order our thoughts. And that's the purpose of the study of logic. It's to order our thoughts, to make perfect the gift or the faculty of reason that we possess. So the 10 categories of Aristotle, Porphyry now explains what they are. They are the ultimate structure of reality as far as ideas and words are concerned. It's the file system of the mind. Aristotle's 10 categories is the file system of the mind. Now, we've said a lot. That brings us to the end of part 3 of chapter 2, and let's move on to part 4. This next part we're going to title Division, Collection, and the Infinite. Division, Collection, and the Infinite. Porphyry writes, but the most special species are indeed contained in a certain number, not in an infinite number. The most special species, so now we just finished talking about the most general genera. Now we're going down to the bottom. The most special species are contained in a certain number. They're not infinite. There's a certain number. There are many most special species, but not infinitely many. The number is large, but it's finite. And this is important for us to understand. Porphyry is drawing our attention to this because science only deals with what can be known. When we talk about philosophy, we're talking about scientific knowledge. Don't get that confused with modern science. We're not talking about laboratory experiments. Something very different. But true philosophy only deals with subjects that can be known. And so infinity, something that's infinite, can't possibly be known. And so that would be outside the reach of philosophy. When we know that there are 10 most general genera, and that there are many, but a finite number of most special species, this entire science of rational philosophy is within our reach. It can be a true science. That's the point that Porphyry is making here. He goes on to say, quote, individuals which are after the most special species, individuals are infinite. Individual things are, potentially at least, infinite in number. For example, how many stars are there? Individual stars. We have no idea. They could be infinite. We don't know. There's one passage in Scripture where I think it's David in the Psalms talking about the impossibility for man to number, let's say, the stars of the sky or the grains of sand on a seashore. He says, to know their number, we must be eternal like you. He says this to God. He says, to number them, we would need to be eternal like you, because they are, as far as we're concerned, they're infinite. We can't study individual grains of sand in any scientific way because the number of them is infinite. But we can study species because the number of them is not infinite. It's not infinite. Individuals are infinite, but species are not infinite. There could always be more individuals. We never know. I mean, just think about it. There's more individuals being produced of living things constantly. We don't know. This shows why true science or philosophical science focuses on species rather than on individuals. And this is a great advantage of philosophy over modern science. Modern science sounds like a good idea until you try to practice it. And you find yourself studying individuals which are, for all practical purposes, infinite in number, and therefore impossible to study. Philosophy stops at most special species, is more accurate and more reliable than modern experimental science, which tries to study individuals. You can see here that Porphyry explains why the ancient philosophers did not become modern scientists, but chose to stick with philosophy. Very, very important concept. He goes on to say, quote, "Hence, when we have descended in our study as far as to the most special species from the most general genera, Plato orders us to rest or to stop there. He advises us to descend through those things which are in the middle, dividing by specific differences." We're going to study differences in a future chapter, so don't worry about that right now. Plato, however, the point here is that Plato taught that we should stop our philosophical division at the species level and not try to divide individuals any further. We should proceed systematically. That's what philosophy is, a systematic study through all of the classes of intermediates under the most general genus, all the way down to most special species, but not try to gain any scientific knowledge of individuals beyond the most special species. He says, quote, "But infinites are to be dismissed, for of these there cannot be any science." Infinites are to be dismissed. We are not to study individuals. Because of these there cannot be any science, because they are innumerable and they are endlessly variable or different. You know, people say things like, every human being has a different fingerprint, that your fingerprint is exclusively your own. Well, if every individual is different, then there's no way to study individuals in a scientific way, because there's just an infinite variety in those individuals. It's not a proper subject for those pursuing wisdom. Infinites are to be dismissed. Of these there cannot be any science. We cannot have scientific knowledge of infinite individuals. Science, true science, philosophical science, deals with universals. And that's what genera and species are. They're universals. They're names of classes. That's what universals means. Not with endless multitudes of individuals. Now, again, this is a fundamental principle of Aristotelian science and philosophy. And this is what draws the line between philosophy and modern science. Very, very important concept. Porphyry goes on to say, quote, "In descending to the most special species, it's necessary, by dividing, to proceed through multitude. But in ascending to the most general genera, it's necessary to collect multitude into one." Let me repeat that. In descending from most general genus down to most special species, it's necessary to proceed through multitude by dividing. We divide genus into species. So to move from the top down, the method is by division. We identify the different species of each genus. We move down by division. But in ascending, moving from most special species up to most general genus, We move by collecting species together into one genus. It is necessary, he says, to collect multitude into one. So division moves from one to many, from genus to species. Collection moves the opposite way, from many species to one genus, or from many individuals to one species. These are the two fundamental logical operations. These are the two fundamental logical operations. The two fundamental logical operations are division from genus down to species, and collection from species up to genus. He says, quote, "For species is collective of many into one nature, of many species into one genus. And genus possesses this power in a still greater degree. Species unifies many individuals under one nature. All humans, for example, share human nature. Genus unifies many species under one broader nature." So see how this relates back to the definition of genus and species. Genus is predicated of many things differing in species. It brings together different species. Species is predicated of many things differing in number. It brings together individuals. Genus unifies many species under one nature. The higher we go, the more things are unified. The more things are collected together into larger and larger common classes. On the contrary, Porphyry says, things which subsist according to a part, particulars, always divide the one into the multitude. Things which subsist or exist according to a part, particulars, and again, this is logical language. A very easy way to think about particulars is to think about the word sum. Sum of a class makes a species. Things which subsist according to a part and particulars always divide the one, the genus, into the multitude of species. Individuals and particular things, and again, we're going to use these terms as we study Aristotelian reasoning. Individuals and particular things have a dividing effect. They break up the unity of the universal or the larger class into multiplicity or a number of smaller classes or individuals. Each individual is a separate instance of the universal nature. Each individual is a separate instance of what is universal, what is said of the whole class. Quote, "For by the participation of species, the multitude of men is one man. But in things which subsist according to a part, and in particulars, that which is one and common to many is contained. Through sharing in the species man, all individual men are united as one man in nature. They all participate in the same human essence. But in individuals, the common nature is particularized and limited. For that which is particular always has a divisive power, but that which is common has the power of collecting and uniting." Again, he's talking about the two logical operations, dividing from class down into species or individuals, and collecting from individuals up to larger classes or genera. And this is, again, just a fundamental principle of reasoning. Particulars, particular things, species and individuals divide and separate. while universals unite and collect together. And this explains why universals are the proper objects of scientific knowledge and not individuals. That's the end of the fourth part of chapter 2. Let's move on to part 5 and bring this long chapter to an end. The fifth part on the rules of predication, which might be the most important part of this chapter, the rules of predication and individuals. Porphyry writes, with respect to genus and species, therefore, having explained what each of them is, so you can feel how this is a conclusion, with respect to genus and species, having explained what each of them is, since genus is one thing, but species is many things, for the division of genus is always into many or more than one species, genus is always predicated of species. All the superiors, that is, all of the things above in the logical hierarchy, are predicated of the inferiors, are predicated of what is below them. This is the general concept of the rule of predication. Higher terms, larger classes, are always predicated of lower terms. For example, man is an animal. The subject is man. The predicate is animal. Animal is superior to man. Animal is the genus of which man is a species. The genus is predicated of the species and of the individual as well. We can say man is an animal because animal, which is a genus, is predicated of man. Logically, animal contains man. Quote, but species is neither predicated of the genus proximate to it nor of any superior genus. So predication does not work in the other way. We cannot say, in answer to the question, what is this? If we were to say an animal, we can't say that an animal is man. That would not be logical. It's actually not true. It's not true to say that an animal is man. It's not true to predicate a species of a genus. This is a fundamental rule in reasoning, in predication. Porphyry continues and says, quote, for it is necessary either that things equal should be predicated of things equal, as, for example, the ability to neigh is predicated of a horse. So it is possible to predicate equal things of equal things. And we see an example there of a peculiarity, which is one of the 5 predicables. A peculiarity can be predicated of a subject and vice versa. Or, a second principle here, greater things may be predicated of lesser things. So equals can be predicated of equals. Greater things can be predicated of lesser things, as animal can be predicated of man. But lesser things cannot be predicated of greater things. Predication works either between equals, properties or peculiarities of their subjects, or from greater to lesser. A genus can be predicated of a species. And also realize what he's saying here is that higher genera can be predicated of any species below them. Higher genera can be predicated of any species, even if it's multiple levels below it. A genus can be predicated of any species below it in the logical hierarchy. This is the fundamental rule of logical predication. The fundamental rule. Equals can be predicated of one another, and superior things can be predicated of inferior things, but inferior things can never be predicated of superior things. You can no longer say that animal is man, as you can say that man is an animal. You cannot say that animal is man. Just think about it. If I were to say that animal is man, and animal is man, you can see that that would not be true, because if there was a dog, animal would not be man. It would be animal, but it would not be man. So the species can never be predicated of its genus. You cannot say that animal is man, as you can say that man is animal. And this is an illustration for this rule, this first rule of predication. The genus is predicated of the species, not vice versa. The relationship between genus and species is a one-way street. Genus can be predicated of species. The greater or the superior in the logical hierarchy can be predicated of the lower or inferior. Porphyry writes, quote, of those things of which species is predicated, of those the genus of the species are also necessarily predicated, as far as to the most general genus. Of those things of which species is predicated, the genus of the species are also necessarily predicated, as far as to the highest or most general genus. So if a species can be predicated of something, let's say man can be predicated of Socrates. Socrates is a man. Then anything above man, anything that can be predicated of man, for example, that man is animal, can also be predicated of the individual. If it's true that man is animal, then it's also true that Socrates is animal. So we see how predication now begins to order all of our logical reasoning. If a species is predicated of something, then all the genera above that species are also necessarily predicated of that thing. This is the principle of what's called transivity. The principle of transivity in predication. If it's true to say that Socrates is a man, Porphyry says, and that man is an animal, and animal is essence or substance, then it is also true to say that Socrates is an animal and an essence. This is an example of transivity. If Socrates is a man and man is an animal, then Socrates must be an animal. If animal is a substance, then Socrates must be a substance. The predication carries up through the entire hierarchy. Everything that can be predicated of a species can be predicated of the subject of that species. I don't want to go any further with that because I think the concept is simple. I don't want to beat it up too much. For, Porphyry says, since superiors are always predicated of inferiors, species is predicated of an individual, but genus is predicated of both species and individuals. And the most general genus is predicated of the genera. If the media and subalterns are many, and also of species and an individual. This explains that the scope of predication, or what the scope of predication is for each level of the hierarchy. The higher something is, the more things it can be predicated of. For the most general genus, Porphyry says, is predicated of all the genera, all the species, and all the individuals contained under it. But the genus, which is prior to the most special species, is predicated of all the most special species and individuals. The highest genus applies to everything below it in the hierarchy. Each genus applies to all the species and individuals under it. And that which is species alone is predicated of the individuals of that species. But an individual is predicated of one particular thing only. The most special species applies to all of its individuals, but individuals apply only to themselves. Socrates, the name, can only be predicated of Socrates. Individuals can be predicated only of themselves. Porphyry continues, quote, an individual, however, is such as Socrates, or this particular white substance, and this particular man who approaches, and so on. Examples of individuals are given here, particular concrete things that can be pointed to or identified by unique descriptions. Aristotle calls these primary substances. We're going to learn about that in the categories. Individuals are the ultimate subjects of predication. Individuals are the ultimate reality. Individuals are the ultimate subjects of predication. And again, Aristotle refers to individuals as primary substances. Porphyry continues, things of this kind are called individuals because each of them consists of peculiarities, of which the collection can never belong to any other thing. All the individuals are unique. They're called individuals because they have a unique collection of properties that can't be exactly duplicated in any other thing. No two individuals can have exactly the same set of accidents, again referring to one of the 5 predicables, they're accidents or circumstances. Porphyry continues, for the same peculiarities as those of Socrates cannot subsist in any other person. However, the same peculiarities of man, I mean as men considered as common, can be inherent in many, or in all particular men, insofar as they are men. So Socrates' individual properties, the fact that, for example, he's the son of Sophroniscus, that he has a particular body, that he lives at a particular time in a particular place, and so on, these individual properties belong only to him. But there are properties that belong to Socrates that are common, properties of human nature, or properties of any class higher than man. The fact that he's rational is a property of Socrates, but not an exclusive property of Socrates. It's common to all men. The fact that he's mortal, the fact that he's capable of laughter, that's a peculiarity of man. They can belong to all humans. And so the Porphyry writes, quote, the individual is contained by the species, and the species is contained by the genus. For genus is a certain whole, or a collection of parts. The individual is like a part, and a species is both a whole, because it's composed of parts, but it's also a part, because it makes up the whole. So this explains this idea of, or this relationship of containment. Individuals are parts of species. Species are parts of genera. Realize that what we're being given here is a very clear understanding of how reasoning works. This is how reasoning works. This is the art of reasoning. This is how our souls actually work. We're being taught how to understand our own minds or souls. Individuals are parts of species. Species are parts of genera. Species, as we learned, has a double nature. It's a whole with respect to individuals, but it's a part with respect to genus. When we get into Aristotle's logic, I'm going to show you how to diagram logical statements and arguments that brings all of this into focus and shows how useful this is. Porphyry writes, "It is a part indeed of something else, but not a whole of anything else, but subsists in other things, for the whole is in its parts." Species is a part relative to genus, but species is a whole relative to individuals. The whole exists in all of its parts taken together. The species exists in the individuals. The genus exists in the species. And then lastly, the last line in this chapter, Porphyry writes, bringing all of this to a conclusion, he writes, "Concerning genus and species, therefore, we have shown what they are, and also what that which is most general and that which is most special are, what things are both genera and species, what are individuals, and in how many ways genus and species are assumed." So Porphyry brings this great chapter to a conclusion by summarizing what's been accomplished in this chapter. The definitions of genus and species, the structure of the logical hierarchy, and the nature of individuals. So if you want to put your knowledge of chapter 2 to the test, go over that last line and test yourself whether you understand everything that it makes mention of. It's a summary of the whole chapter, and that brings us to the end of this very long second chapter in Porphyry's Introduction. I'd like to give you 12 points of memory work. I'm going to be very quick here because we're already at an hour and 40 minutes for this lecture. Number 1. Species is predicated of many things differing in number in answer to the question, what is this? Number 2. The most general genus is genus only and not species. Number 3. The most special species is species only and not genus. Number 4. Subaltern genera and species are both genus and species relative to different things. Number 5. There are 10 most general genera corresponding to Aristotle's categories. Number 6. Most special species are finite in number, but individuals are infinite. Number 7. Division proceeds from one to many, while collection proceeds from many to one. Number 8. Superior terms are always predicated of inferior terms, but not vice versa. Number 9. If a species is predicated of something, all the genera above it are also predicated of that thing. Number 10. Individuals consist of peculiarities that cannot belong to any other thing. Number 11. Species is both whole and part, whole relative to individuals, part relative to genus. And lastly, number 12, the whole exists in its parts. So that at long last brings us to the end of chapter 2. In this lecture, the second lecture on chapter 2, we've studied the second part of this very long and very important chapter. We've discussed the definition of species in this lecture. We've talked about the logical hierarchy from most general all the way down to most special. We've talked about the principles of division and collection and the rules of predication. Taken together with our previous class on the three meanings of genus and the true or philosophical meaning, we've now completed this study of what is obviously a foundational chapter on genus and species, really a foundational chapter in the art of reasoning. So having gone through all of that, and fortunately you get a lot of instructional time for having studied these lectures, now it's time for you to reread the lesson for yourself, to study the lesson carefully and completely, to develop and demonstrate your understanding of the lesson through the assessments that are available. It's a lot of content. Let the assessments be your guide. If you have any questions, if you need any help, please get in touch. I'm always available. You can contact me on the Academy support page at classicalliberalarts.com/support, or send me an email, mail@classicalliberalarts.com. Once again, my name is William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and this brings the second lecture on Chapter 2 of Porphyry's Introduction to a close. I hope that these lectures have been helpful. God bless your studies.